Griffin, back in the beginning, I had this assumption that there was a benefit for veterans. There was a benefit for people who had had post-traumatic stress disorder, that there was a benefit for those who'd been exposed to Agent Orange and the various things that happened in Afghanistan. We've had, and many of them were Griffin subscribers, that we got unbelievable testimonials from these veterans, these first responders, on all of these types of things, and many, many reports of people going off massive amounts of medications and actually getting their life back. And in many cases, as you well know, the suicide rate among our veterans is shocking. We think of all the horrible things going on in our country. Every 65 minutes, another veteran takes their life in this country. And that's because of this post-traumatic, and I believe a lot of it is because of the excess of drugs that have been caused. And so, ironically, in the last month or two, Stanford Graham, who has become one of the top experts in the world on nitric oxide, and specifically Cardiomiracle's physiological and biological basis and what it impacts in the body, has been doing extensive research with some major experts on this connection that I had a hunch about and had seen results from, but now we're going to get into some deep opportunity science and clinical studies to really make a major effort to try to help reach out to those who suffered traumatic brain disease, brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as the neurological diseases, Parkinson's, and others that are so rampant in our society today. So we're delighted to present that today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stanford for a report on progress of the work that he's doing.
Thanks, John. Hey, Jared, some of the things that you said just at the beginning about the effect of our belief system on our physiology. And that's really what you were talking about when you're talking about the allergies and maybe other situations, other dysfunctional aspects of our bodies that, we need a pill to fix that thing. Or a disbelief, or I guess I would say a disbelief in the ability of our own perspective, our own will, or our own belief systems about how our bodies actually work, and whether what we think and what we believe actually have physiological significance, biological significance. In referring to the research that I've done over the last a little over a month with regard to not necessarily, I wouldn't call it mental health. There is a category of science around what we would typically call mental health. I would make it a little bit broader, and to change the terminology, I would call it phenomenon or phenomena of the mental condition, right? There are different kinds of mental illnesses. We'll put air quotes around mental illnesses that are identified by folks in the medical industry, the psychiatric industry, et cetera, like this post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an attempt to describe something that's going on with the human, or acute stress disorder. There are lots of different kinds of titles that are associated with or attached to phenomenon that healthcare practitioners see when they observe patients. Well, so what's the relevance about this? Well, if we take a really close look at a human being, we see that the brain area is connected to the body through this area called the neck. That they're actually connected, and that we have all these complex physiological, biological systems in our body that are connected with our brain. We have circulatory systems, we have cardiovascular systems, we have lymphatic systems, we have endocrine systems, we have immunology systems, we have all these, this array of beautifully complex biological systems working. And what we need to, as a part of my research, help me understand is, look, we really do need to understand that there is a vital and very dynamic relationship between the health that we have below our necks and the health of what we have above our necks. Like the brain and the body are intimately connected, very friendly, and how goes one can go the other. And so if you can bring up the slide deck, I'd appreciate it. Over the last month, Edward, I took a look at, John and I were on a webinar with a remarkable doctor. Her name is Lee Valit. She's a medical doctor out of Arizona. She's the chairman of the Truth for Health Foundation, which is a remarkable organization. And during that webinar, one of the participants was a psychologist, a PhD, who asked us whether nitric oxide could facilitate improvement or supporting health, improve health in those who had suffered post-traumatic stress disorder and other stress-induced conditions. And my answer was, I don't know, but let's take a look. And so let's go to the next slide. What we did find was that there, as I've just stated here, there's a very tight correlation between how we're doing biologically and how we're doing mentally. And that how we typically talk about mental illness or mental states is really the phenomenon, the expression of biological conditions. If you'll think about that for just a minute, that our mental state is a phenomenological experiment or a phenomenological expression of how our body is operating physiologically and biologically, how healthy we are internally. A lot of folks, when we talk about stress, they'll think about what are the characteristics of stress? How does it evidence itself in our lives? Well, we know that people that have high stress or high anxiety suffer from inability to focus, a lack of biological energy, persistent but inefficient sleep. And then it kind of, from those generalities, we see other characteristics spring from there. More particularly, if you look at the bullet point number 2 on the current slide, is what we know from the latest research is that what we regard stress, mental stress, induces cellular dysfunction. That our mental state can cause dysfunction in all kinds of different cellular processes. And that it can actually, the condition of mental stress can actually change. Mental stress can start our immune system working. It can cause our immune system to have a response, which means that the immune system turns on and spits out immune macrophages. That is, macrophages that cause inflammation in the body because they think they're addressing a diseased state or an infection state. And the consequence of the immune system turning on is the inflammation in the body increasing, which is a good thing if it's temporary. But what we've seen with with stress mental states is they can persuade the body that it's in a persistent state of attack. And so the immune system stays on. The immune system continues to put out these inflammatory molecules that stop helping the body and start hurting the body. So you'll see in this third bullet point, there are these items we call inflammatory markers. So these are molecules in the body that can be measured that indicate whether the body is in an inflamed condition or an oxidative state, or if it's not. And again, the point here is that the characteristics that we see of mental stress can evidence themselves physiologically, and by changing our cellular processes in our body and in our brain, and that the mental state can increase, by turning on the immune system, can increase what we call inflammatory biomarkers.
Let me interrupt just for a second, if I may. That's exactly the situation I was confronting when we had to deal with the publication of that book on allergies. it was very difficult to comprehend that a mental condition, a state of mind, could actually produce a physically measurable difference in the body itself that we might describe as a disease state. And the two seem to be completely separate because one is mental or it's imaginable, but not physical, and the other is physical and not mental. And yet I see this, you're talking about the same thing here that you're rediscovering in terms of anxiety and that kind of thing. So I get it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Let's go to the next slide. So take a look at this. This is language out of a study. I'll read it as your friend and as our common friend, Dr. David Martin would say, at the speed of consciousness. You know, to read these words at the speed of consciousness. I ask our participants to look at these words and think about it. Significant structural, functional, and neurochemical alterations in specific regions in the brain that regulate stress and emotion. This is a characteristic. These are characteristics of mental, what we would call the phenomenon of mental stress. That mental stress causes significant structural, functional, and neurochemical alterations in specific regions in the brain that regulate stress and emotion. So we're thinking that mental stress on its own, as a function of biological and cellular processes, can cause structural alterations in the brain tissue, structural alterations in the functionality of brain tissue, neurochemical changes in the brain. To me, if we think about this, it's really quite, on the one hand, it's like a two-edged sword. It's shocking, but it's also, in a pejorative sense, it can be shocking, but it can also be shocking in an ameliorative sense, in a positive sense, to think that our mental condition can actually improve the plasticity. Our brain is very plastic, it can improve itself. It can mend itself. We've learned a lot in science in the terms of the plasticity of the brain to improve itself and heal itself. But the point here is that our mental state and the stresses that we feel, or that we experience as a function of our beliefs, for example,